Revenge was never part of the vase, but there she was, undressing in front of me with another man. My hands were tied, my dignity crushed. She thought this was my punishment for a betrayal I never committed. The sound of her laughter still echoes in my mind, cruel and twisted in its satisfaction. But that moment awakened something darker in me. If she wanted revenge, I would give her something far worse. I watched silently, planning. Her world was about to burn, and this time, I held the match. Now, no one was safe, not her, not him. They would soon understand the true meaning of betrayal. Tom walked into his country home on a quiet Wednesday morning. He hadn't been there since Sunday, and just wanted to grab a few things quickly. He assumed Peggy, his wife, would be at work. As he entered the kitchen to make coffee, he noticed the handcuffs and duct tape still lying on the table where he had left them. A crumpled kitchen towel lay on the floor. He had used it to dry his face. The video camera remained on the tripod beside the table, and the overturned chair was still on the floor. Instead of making coffee, Tom opened the refrigerator and grabbed a bottle of Diet Coke. "Where have you been?" Peggy's sharp voice broke the silence as she walked into the kitchen. Tom didn't reply. He walked past her, heading to the bedroom to grab some clothes. "I asked you a question," she said, her frustration evident as she grabbed his arm. Tom stopped and turned to face her. He looked at the woman he had married 7 years ago, the woman he had loved, but now she felt like a stranger. "Let me go," he said quietly. Peggy stared into his eyes, but they were dull and lifeless. Reluctantly, she released his arm, allowing him to pass. Peggy began tidying up. She picked up the handcuffs, duct tape, and towel, throwing them into the trash. Then, she unscrewed the camera from the tripod, placed it on the table, and folded the tripod to set it aside. Afterward, she walked into the bedroom. Tom stood by the bed, a large suitcase open before him. He was packing. "What are you doing?" Peggy asked. "I'm packing," he replied bluntly. "Another business trip?" "No." "Then where are you going?" Tom stopped what he was doing and looked at her. His face showed no emotion. "Why does it matter?" "You're my husband. I have a right to know," she said firmly. "Peg, you gave up that right last Sunday afternoon." Tom added a few more items to his bag and zipped it closed. He carried the suitcase to the living room, placing it by the door, before heading to his study. Peggy followed him. In the study, he gathered some papers from the desk and slid them into his briefcase. Then, he packed his laptop and charger into a computer bag. Back in the kitchen, Tom picked up the video camera and checked the SD card inside. "Is this what you recorded on Sunday?" he asked. Peggy smiled slyly. "A memory of your payback. That's very thoughtful of you." "Thank you," Tom replied, his tone serious. "Tom, please talk to me," Peggy pleaded, raising her voice. He glanced at her, a flicker of emotion crossing his face. "What happened between us?" "Why are you leaving?" she asked, her confusion growing. "Come sit at the table with me," Tom said. He opened his computer bag, placed his laptop on the table, and motioned for her to sit down. Once she did, he inserted the SD card into the laptop. "Let's watch this," he suggested. "Then we can talk." He started the video. On the screen, a chair was pushed away from the kitchen table, leaving an empty space nearby. "Welcome home. Come into the kitchen. I have a surprise for you," Peggy's voice played on the recording. Tom smiled as Peggy walked toward him. She wore a light robe, her hair and makeup perfectly done. She held something in her hands and returned his smile warmly. "Please have a seat," she said playfully. Tom complied, sitting in the chair and smiling back. Peggy moved behind him for a moment before returning. She gently placed her hand over his mouth, her expression teasing. "Are you ready for your surprise?" she asked coyly. Tom nodded, his smile unbroken. Then, they heard footsteps approaching. Tom turned toward the sound, his smile faltering as a man walked into the room, wearing Tom's robe. Tom's expression shifted from joy to confusion as Peggy walked over to the man, Joey, and slowly loosened the belt on his robe. She let it fall to the floor, revealing Joey was completely undressed underneath. Tom paused the video, his face hard as he turned to Peggy. "Why did you do this?" he asked, his voice low and steady. You know why, Peggy replied coldly. Hold on, Peggy. I don't know what you mean, Tom said, his confusion evident. Before we got married, I told you if you ever betrayed me, I would make sure you knew exactly how it felt. And I'd do it right in front of you, Peggy explained, her tone sharp and resolute. Tom's brows furrowed as he searched her face. Is this what this is about? You think I betrayed you? I know you did, she snapped. When did I ever betray you? Tom demanded. Don't play games. You know exactly when it happened, Peggy said, her frustration growing. Tom sighed and pulled the SD card from the laptop, slipping it into his bag. He closed the laptop and zipped the bag shut. You need to tell me what's going on, or I'm leaving right now, he said firmly, his tone edged with anger. Peggy crossed her arms. Don't act like you don't know. Last week, while you were on that so-called business trip, I got a call from Jerry's wife, Jill. She said you and Jerry spent the week with some women, she explained. And what proof did she have? Tom asked. Stop pretending to be the victim, Peggy replied sharply. You know what you did. So you acted based on a phone call? With no real proof? Tom asked incredulously. Yes, I did, Peggy said defiantly. I didn't need anything more. Tom's jaw tightened. Peg, you tied me up and brought another man into our home. Right in front of me. You humiliated me. All because of something someone said? Without any evidence. Yes, Peggy replied without hesitation. Now we're even. Evens? Tom echoed, disbelief coloring his voice. Yes. Even, she said firmly. Tom leaned back in his chair, his gaze unwavering. It may not matter now, but there are a few things I want to say. Go ahead. I'm listening, Peggy replied. Tom's voice was calm, but cutting as he began. I was at a conference all last week. Jerry wasn't even there. He was fired from the band 2 months ago for having an affair with a receptionist. I haven't spoken to him since. I was a speaker at the conference, sitting on stage from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. every day. The entire week was recorded. Afterward, I worked with the team until midnight to plan for the next day. I never left the hotel until I went to the airport. Peggy's eyes narrowed. So, you deny everything? I do, Tom said firmly. And I can prove it. Meanwhile, you acted based on a drunken phone call. You tied me up, embarrassed me, and shattered our marriage. All without any real evidence. That's a weak case, Peggy. I don't believe you, she said, her voice trembling. What we believe doesn't make it true, Tom replied steadily. I once thought I was married to the most wonderful woman. But on Sunday, I learned I was married to someone who would destroy me without any proof. Peggy stayed silent. Tom stood, his decision made. I'm leaving now. You'll hear from my lawyer soon. I'm not going to divorce you, Peggy said desperately. That's what this was all about. Now we're even. Peggy, I didn't betray you, Tom said, his tone filled with finality. I don't believe you, she replied, shaking her head. Then there's nothing more to say, Tom said, heading for the door. Call Jill and find out the truth. I'd like to know too, but it doesn't matter anymore. Without another word, Tom left the house. Once he reached his hotel room, Tom copied the video onto 3 DVDs. He already had a meeting set with his lawyer and started the process of filing for divorce. The grounds? Infidelity. Tom handed a DVD to his lawyer, who confirmed that the prenuptial agreement would be upheld with the evidence on the disc. Once the documents were filed, Tom personally delivered the paperwork to Peggy. The lawyer also suggested some financial matters Tom needed to handle immediately. After leaving the lawyer's office, he took care of them and then returned to his hotel room. Tom checked his phone, which he had silenced earlier. The first call from Peggy came just 5 minutes after he had left her, followed by a 2-hour break. Then the calls started coming in every 5 minutes. He decided to listen to just one voicemail, the first one after the gap. Oh my God, Tom, I finally reached Jill. She was drunk. Please call me. I made a mistake. Please call me. Peggy's voice trembled with desperation. Tom deleted all her voicemails and ignored the rest of her calls, texts, and emails. They kept coming in relentlessly. Among the missed calls, Tom noticed numbers from Peggy's father, mother, and sister. Reluctantly, he decided to return her father Sean's call. "Hey, Sean. It's Tom," he greeted calmly. "I know who you are," Sean said tersely. "What did you do to my daughters?" "I didn't do anything to her except not answer her calls," Tom replied evenly. "She's upset." "What's going on?" "Sean, if you want to know what happened, talk to Peggy," Tom said firmly. "I'm talking to you. You really messed up." "I ought to come over there and give you a piece of my mind," Sean retorted angrily. Tom remained calm. "Listen, Sean, if you want answers, you need to hear them from Peggy. I'm not discussing this with you, Mary, or anyone else. Talk to Peggy." "How could you do this to her?" Sean demanded. "Goodbye, Sean," Tom said, ending the call. Sean called back immediately, but Tom ignored him. Shortly after, Tom received calls from Peggy's mother, Mary. He deleted her messages without listening. By the evening, Tom stepped out for dinner and returned to his hotel room to get some rest. On Thursday morning, he purchased a new cell phone while keeping the old one. He informed his workplace of his new number, but asked them to keep it private. Afterward, Tom rented a small furnished apartment on the edge of town and signed a 6-month lease. He bought groceries and basic supplies, setting up his new place by the end of the day. On Friday morning, Tom's lawyer called. They met at the courthouse, where Tom signed additional papers. After filing, he received a copy to deliver to Peggy. While her signature wasn't required, the lawyer reminded him to have a neutral witness present when handing her the papers. Tom called Peggy, and they agreed to meet for lunch at their usual restaurant. When Peggy arrived, Tom was already seated at a quiet table in the back. She looked put together as she approached him. Tom stood to greet her, but when she tried to hug him, he turned his cheek, making her disappointment evident. They sat down across from each other. "Tom, I made a mistake. I want us to move past this and look forward," Peggy said earnestly. Tom nodded slightly. "I agree. It's time to move forward." The waiter, Lynn, a familiar face to both of them, came to take their order. "What would you like to drink?" Lynn asked, smiling. "2 Diet Cokes," Peggy answered quickly. "Lynn, can you stay for a moment?" Tom interjected. He reached into his bag and handed Peggy some papers. "Peggy, these are the divorce papers," he said evenly. "Lynn is here to witness that you've been informed." Peggy's face paled as she looked down at the papers. "Thank you, Lynn," she muttered weakly. Lynn nodded and left to get their drinks. "Tom, you said you wanted to move on," Peggy said, her voice trembling. "That's exactly what I'm doing," Tom replied firmly. "But I made a mistake." "That's not what I meant," Peggy said, her desperation growing. "Peggy, we've been married for over 7 years. Those were the best years of my life. I loved you deeply, and I might never love anyone that way again," Tom said quietly. "Then don't let it go, Tom. We had a great marriage," Peggy pleaded. "It was great," Tom admitted. "But it won't be anymore. Last Sunday changed everything. And it changed how I feel about you. I made a mistake. Can't you understand?" she begged. Tom's eyes were cold but steady. "Let me tell you what I see now when I look at you, or when I close my eyes. I see the woman I loved. But I also see the betrayal, the humiliation, and the pain. That day is burned into my memory. It changed everything. But it was all a mistake." Peggy cried. "No," Tom said firmly. "It was a choice. You knew what would happen if you did this." "I didn't think it would go that far," Peggy said softly, looking down at the table. "What did I say would happen if you crossed that line?" Tom asked quietly. "You said you'd leave me," Peggy said, her voice shaking. "I did," Tom replied. "And you agreed to that." "Yes, but it didn't mean anything," Peggy argued. Tom reached into his bag and held out a DVD. "This is for you. It shows exactly what happened." "Tom, it wasn't what you think," she said quickly. "I was just trying to get even." As Lynn returned with their drinks and took their lunch orders, Tom shook his head. "Peggy, being with someone else when you're married is wrong. And unless both people agree, it's considered cheating." "We can sort this out," Peggy pleaded. "We can talk to a counselor." "No, Peg, we can't," Tom said firmly. You showed me a side of you that changed everything. You hurt me deeply. But I want to fight for this. I don't want a divorce, Peggy insisted. Tom's eyes darkened. On Sunday, you surprised me with another side of you. I have a side too, Peggy, and you might not want to see it. What side is that? She asked cautiously. The side where I can be just as unkind and uncaring as you were on Sunday, he said coldly. But unlike you, I won't use my mistake as an excuse. I'll own what I do.
That's not you, Tom.
You're not like that, Peggy said softly. That's interesting because I feel the same way about you, Tom countered. You claim it was a bad choice, but I see it as a planned act of revenge. What did you tell your parents? Tom asked after a moment. I told them we had a disagreement, Peggy admitted, avoiding his gaze. A disagreement about what? Peggy hesitated. I told them you were seeing someone else. You didn't tell them the truth? No, she said quietly. Why not? They wouldn't understand. They'd never see it as a mistake, Peggy said, her voice trembling. Maybe I'm finally seeing it, Tom replied. Peggy, I know what you did was wrong. You focused on your feelings instead of the truth. You caused me a lot of pain. But we can't move past this. We can't repair our marriage. We can forget this happened, Peggy protested. No, we can't. The person I loved is gone, Tom said firmly. There's nothing left to save. I'll keep fighting, Peggy said determinedly. Don't, Tom warned. Don't make me show you my other side. You won't like it. You're just pretending, she challenged. Don't test me, Peggy. Get a lawyer. Have them review the divorce papers and contact mine if they have questions. In 90 days, you'll be free to do whatever you want. This isn't about Joey, she snapped. I'm sorry, Tom said, his tone softening slightly. That wasn't fair of me. But I'm not leaving you, Peg. You already left me. The settlement is fair. Accept it and move on. No way, she said stubbornly. Lynn returned with their food, and Tom handed her his credit card to settle the bill. When she came back with the receipt, Tom signed it, stood up, and looked down at Peggy. Enjoy your meal, Peggy, he said quietly. I lost my appetite last Sunday when you spat on me. Tom walked out of the restaurant, leaving Peggy sitting there alone. On Tuesday, Peggy met with her lawyer, Ronnie Savage, a sharp and highly recommended attorney. Please have a seat, Mrs. Given. I'm Ronnie. How can I help you? My husband is trying to divorce me, Peggy said, handing over the divorce papers. Ronnie scanned the documents, pausing on a few key points. He's citing infidelity. Is that true? No, it's a misunderstanding, Peggy insisted. Were you with someone else besides your husband? Ronnie pressed. Yes, but it was a mistake, Peggy admitted. Did your husband agree to this arrangement? Not specifically with that person, Peggy said, hesitating. But he knew I could be with someone if he cheated. So, he cheated, and you sought revenge?
Yes.
Well, I thought he cheated. But it turns out he didn't, Peggy admitted, lowering her voice. Ronnie leaned back in her chair. You thought he was unfaithful, and yet you still acted on it. Yes, Peggy said, swallowing hard. I acted on false information. Does he have proof that you were with someone else? Ronnie asked.
Yes.
I made him watch, Peggy confessed, her voice barely audible. Does he have evidence beyond that? Peggy handed Ronnie the DVD. He gave me this on Friday. May I watch it? Ronnie asked. Peggy nodded. Ronnie inserted the disc into a player but stopped it after a few minutes. I'll need to watch the rest later, but I see where this is headed. Let's focus on the petition first. After reading through the documents, Ronnie looked up. You signed a prenuptial agreement, and it's solid, especially regarding fidelity. If we change the complaint to irreconcilable differences, we might avoid that clause. But even with the prenup, he's offering you far more than the law requires. I don't care about the money, Peggy said quietly. I don't want a divorce. I want my husband back. 2 days later, Tom's lawyer called him in for a meeting. They're asking for 6 weeks of counseling, the lawyer informed him. What happens if I refuse?
Tom asked.
They'll push back hard. She's hired Ronnie Savage. Tom raised an eyebrow. She's good. Very good, the lawyer agreed. But I'm better. Are you ready for a fight? Tom nodded. Do whatever it takes. Let's decline the counseling and see what happens. That evening, Tom called Peggy. Peggy, he said firmly, I'm not going to counseling. This divorce is happening. I won't give you another chance to make it easier. I won't call you again. I'm standing my ground, Tom, Peggy said firmly. I don't want a divorce. Have it your way, Tom replied before hanging up. The following Monday, Peggy filed a countersuit, claiming they simply couldn't agree anymore, and she asked for everything. 2 days later, the school board at Peggy's workplace received anonymous documents alleging inappropriate behavior between two married teachers, Peggy Given and Joseph Carr. Along with the report were photos of the two together. The school board convened an emergency meeting and decided to terminate both of them the same day. That evening, Joey's wife, Tammy Carr, received a DVD in the mail. The video clearly identified Peggy and Joey, along with a timestamp of when it was recorded. After watching it, Tammy called Tom. Hi, this is Tom Given, he answered. This is Tammy Carr, she said, her voice strained. Joey's wife. Did you send me that DVD?
Yes.
I'm sorry, but I thought you should know, Tom replied. When was this recorded? A week ago Sunday, at my house. Is that you sitting in the chair? She asked. Yes, it is. And the video is real? Unedited. It's completely genuine. And that woman, she's your wife? For now, yes, Tom said flatly. I've already filed for divorce. That's all I needed to know, Tammy said curtly before hanging up. Her next call was to a divorce lawyer. The following day, Joey called Peggy. What were you thinking? He demanded. Getting back at Tom and dragging me into this? You've put my job and my marriage at risk. Despite the backlash, losing her job and receiving Joey's scorn, Peggy refused to give up. A week later, when Tom heard nothing from Peggy's lawyer, he decided to escalate matters. Peggy's parents and sister received a DVD in the mail. After watching it, they confronted Peggy, demanding answers. Tom's phone rang. It was his sister, Mandy. Tom, how could you? Peggy cares about you, she exclaimed. Mandy, she has a strange way of showing it, Tom replied. It wasn't just a mistake, it was planned revenge. Ask her for the full story. What is the truth, Tom? Mandy asked. I wasn't doing anything wrong. A friend told her I was, and she believed it without any proof. This was her response. But Peggy isn't foolish, Mandy insisted. Then ask her yourself, Tom said. Tell her if she stops fighting the divorce, it'll all be over. If she keeps pushing, things will get worse. Can't you handle this without dragging everyone into it? Have you even watched the DVD, Mandy?
Tom asked.
No, not yet.
Do it.
Then decide for yourself, Tom said firmly. An hour later, Mandy called back. Oh, Tom, I'm so sorry.
I see things differently now.
But I still want to talk to Peggy. She needs to understand. Tell her what I said. Drop the countersuit, and it'll end. If she doesn't, it'll get messy, eh? Mandy visited Peggy in person and confirmed Tom's honesty. She shared his warning, but Peggy remained steadfast. Mandy then informed their parents about what Peggy had done and Tom's offer. That night, Peggy's parents urged her to reconsider, even consulting a family friend who was a lawyer. His advice? Quietly settle the case in divorce court. Still, Peggy refused to back down. Tom took another step. Peggy, who taught Sunday school at her family's church, became the target of a smear campaign. Flyers appeared throughout the congregation showing photos of Peggy with another man, questioning whether she should be teaching children. After service, the pastor spoke with Peggy's parents privately, explaining the situation and handing them a letter for Peggy. It stated that her services were no longer needed. The letter also included a copy of the flyer. When her parents showed it to Peggy, she was devastated but still refused to drop her case. Peggy's lawyer, Ronnie, reviewed the situation and reminded her, the video clearly shows you gave Tom permission to share it. And the flyers? They don't have Tom's name on them, so they can't easily be traced back to him. Even so, Peggy's family pleaded with her to let it go, as the fallout was affecting them too. Her brother, Sean, called Tom to express his concerns. Tom repeated his stance, tell her to drop the case. If she doesn't, it will only get worse. A few days later, Peggy's neighbors and friends received similar flyers, this time listing her name and contact information. Her phone and email were flooded with harassing messages. People threw trash on her car and lawn. Another week passed, and Tom took things further. He began posting on her social media accounts, starting with vague hints before sharing edited photos. Soon after, Peggy received an email from a website thanking her for contributing the video. Then, a news crew arrived at her home. At that point, Peggy called her lawyer and dropped the countersuit. She asked to meet with Tom. He agreed but insisted the meeting take place at his lawyer's office. When they met, Peggy looked frail and exhausted. She had lost weight and seemed a shadow of her former self. Tom sat across from her at the table. "I've decided not to pursue the countersuit," Peggy said quietly. "You won." "No, Peggy," Tom replied, his voice heavy. "I lost. I lost the woman I cared about, the marriage I believed in, everything that mattered to me. And I lost it because of a side of you I never knew existed. I'm sorry you had to see that side of me," Peggy said tearfully. "I don't know what to say. I can't go anywhere without being judged. I can't even find a job. Everyone we know treats me like an outcast. I feel like I have to leave just to start over. We both lost so much, didn't we?" Tom said, his voice softening. "Yes," Peggy whispered. "We have." Tom's eyes filled with tears. "I know it's too late now, but is there anything I can do to fix this?" "Anything at all?" Peggy's voice cracked. "Other than wishing we could turn back time?" "Yeah, besides that," Tom replied, shaking his head. "I don't think so." He stood, ready to leave. Peggy rose and opened her arms for a hug, tears streaming down her face. Tom took a step toward her but stopped, hesitating. "I can't, Peggy," he said softly. "It wouldn't feel right." He turned toward the door, but paused with his hand on the knob. Looking back at her, he said, "There is one thing that might help." "What is it?" she asked hopefully. "You could say you're sorry. Just once." With that, Tom walked out of the office and out of her life.